From the American College of Financial Services, welcome to Annuity Insights, in partnership with New York Life.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Annuity Insights. I'm Michael Finke. I'm a professor of wealth management at the American College of Financial Services. I'm joined here by Wade Pfau, whom I'm sure many of you know. Wade Pfau is author of the Retirement Planning Guidebook and professor of practice. And I'm also here with Phil Caminiti. Phil is head of third-party distribution for New York Life Annuities. And today's topic is going to be, how do annuities fit into an investment portfolio? It's a pretty easy question if you're talking about variable annuities, because variable annuities are pretty much just a shell around a traditional investment portfolio. But where it gets really complicated is when people buy lifetime income. Where does that come from within a portfolio? How does that affect your asset allocation? And I think I'm going to start with Phil. Like, when you invest in lifetime income, Phil, what does that mean in terms of your overall portfolio allocation? If you do decide to buy future income, how should you think about the money that you invest in future income?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Michael, and it's one that we certainly see out in the field pretty often. I think the misconception is that if you add some type of guaranteed income, you might be adding some risks to the portfolio, or you might be limiting the portfolio's upside in some way. In actuality, what we see, and if you think about it, is what you do when you're buying a stream of income is you're literally purchasing that guaranteed income stream, which really does give clients the ability and the confidence to invest, even actually a little bit more risky, take on a little more risk in their portfolio, because they have that preset income stream that's going to be coming in. That's locked in. We're seeing folks potentially take that from some of the fixed income portfolio. But again, with the guaranteed income that only an annuity can provide, it does give the client and the advisor a little bit more confidence to take a little more risk in their portfolio.
Wade, is that how you think about incorporating an annuity into a portfolio allocation?
Right. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I really like to think about when we're talking about lifetime income with annuities, it's like a fixed income asset. You know, bonds pay coupon payments until a fixed maturity date and then return face value. Well, annuities, it's the same sort of idea. It's structured a bit differently. It incorporates actuarial science to pay you fixed monthly payments for as long as you live, for as long as you actually need those funds. And the longer your retirement lasts, the more expensive it is to meet your retirement spending goals, the more the annuity provides. When we think about asset allocation, you're not necessarily drawing from the stock side of the ledger to purchase an annuity. It's really thinking about drawing from the bond side. And as Phil mentioned, that's justifiable because you have this income stream. Your lifestyle is less vulnerable to market volatility. So it really is possible to frame the annuity as part of the bond or fixed income allocation in the portfolio.
Well, that does create some problems, Wade, doesn't it? Because when you think about your overall asset allocation outside of annuity, if you buy, let's say, future income with the bond portion of your portfolio, that's going to shift the asset allocation. So in other words, if you have a 50% equity, 50% bond portfolio, and let's say you take 40% of your bond portfolio and use it to buy future income, then you're going to have to rebalance the remainder of your portfolio so there's more heavy invested in equities. Is that a problem? Does that make your portfolio more risky?
Well, I think it does not make your portfolio more risky, and mathematically, it's perfectly fine to do this. If there's any problem, it would be more on the behavioral side of, are people comfortable looking at, with my investment portfolio, it's not that I own more stocks, but my remaining investment portfolio has a higher stock allocation. Now that's justifiable because outside of the portfolio, you have all this additional fixed income, just like Social Security. I really think people should think about Social Security. It's an annuity as well. It's part of the bond allocation, allowing you to invest more aggressively on the investment side. And as long as behaviorally people are okay and comfortable thinking about it that way, mathematically, it's not a problem at all.
And do you agree with that, Phil?
I do, and I do think, one of the things, Michael, we see out in the field, and we encounter with advisors, and they don't understand this necessarily, and not that they don't, their clients might not, is, Wade hit the nail on the head as far as what Social Security is. It's an annuity. So is a pension. A pension plan is also the same. And one of the things we find is that married couples or partners, they don't realize that if you do an income annuity, for example, you can have it based off joint lives. So in the event that somebody passes away, one of the annuitants, the payment stays exactly the same, which is counterintuitive and different than what happens with Social Security or potentially with a pension, right? Sometimes the pension gets reduced. Social Security, you all know, you get the bigger check, but the smaller check goes away. With an income annuity, the payments remain exactly the same through both lives, which is always a aha moment when we're talking to an advisor that might not be familiar with income annuities.
Wait, I was just reading a article by Susie Orman. And in the article, Susie said, I would never buy any kind of a fixed annuity because interest rates could change over time. And you would essentially feel a certain amount of regret if interest rates shifted and let's say you could have invested today in similar types of investments like bonds, and you could have gotten a higher yield from your portfolio. Is that the right way to think about whether or not to buy an annuity from a bond portfolio?
No, I don't think that's the right way. I think that kind of thinking is linked too much to how we think about investing pre-retirement, that we're really trying to grow a pot of assets. And what makes retirement different is we now have to fund a liability. We have to match assets to meet our expenses in retirement. And so if we work through the scenario she's talking about, she's like, oh, well, if interest rates rise, I could purchase more income from my annuity. My given premium will offer a higher payout rate at that point. So I get more spending power for the rest of my life. And if I purchase the annuity when interest rates are low, I miss out on that. But she's not thinking through the whole problem. If interest rates rise, the value of her bond portfolio will decline. In the meantime, she's been spending from that bond portfolio to meet her expenses, so that even though the annuity payout rate might be higher after an interest rate increase, she's not going to have as much money left to pay for the annuity. So she's not necessarily going to get more income that way. And that's really what makes retirement different from pre-retirement. You have to think about the fact that you have to manage spending. You don't get to magically wait for interest rates to rise and have that not impact anything else on your balance sheet. You really got to think with the big picture, and that's what's missing with that kind of simplified analysis.
Yeah, I think if you had, say, a liability of wanting to have, say, $3,000 of extra income on top of Social Security to fund your basic expenses, and you had the choice of either doing it from a conventional, let's say, bond ETF, or from another strategy like using a liability driven approach with bonds where you buy a bond and it matures and provides you with exactly $3,000 of income per month, or buying an annuity that provides you with $3,000 per month. There's some significant disadvantages to using a bond mutual fund, isn't there?
Oh, right, right. Absolutely. In retirement, that's part of, we think about bonds pre-retirement really as you have a constant duration bond fund that rises in value or declines in value with interest rate fluctuations. In retirement, you really need to think of it more like a bond ladder where I'm going to hold the bond to maturity. Then as a household investor, I get to ignore the interest rate fluctuations. I get the face value at maturity. I get any coupon payments along the way. But then, well, how much do I need to purchase in the bond ladder to meet my retirement expenses? There's a possibility I might live a long time. And so the cost of funding my retirement through bonds, it's going to grow with how long I want to be able to fund that retirement for. And we can account for the fact that my bonds will grow with interest, but I have to set aside the full present value of all that potential future spending. And that's where the insurance company is much better equipped to manage the sort of risk related to longevity, to the what if I live to 95 or 100? Well, I have to set aside all the bonds for age 95 or 100 if I'm worried about living that long. The insurance company can recognize they have thousands of, or even tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of customers. They can manage the idea that, well, maybe 10% of their customers will live to age 100. So they only have to set aside 10% as much as I would as a household investor. And that allows them to have their customers meet their retirement spending needs over their lifetime at a much lower cost than it would take if I manage it through my own bond portfolio and I manage for a retirement beyond my life expectancy, where I have a 50% chance of living beyond that age.
So we said previously that a good way to think about buying an annuity is that you buy it from the bond portion of a portfolio. But what you're saying is that actually bonds are less efficient at fulfilling that income liability than annuities are. So in a way, annuities are actually safer than the bonds they replace within the portfolio if you're using a goal-based retirement planning process where the goal is to fund a specific lifestyle. You can actually do it more safely. Now, again, that has more implications when it comes to asset allocation, because it may mean that the optimal asset allocation is actually even higher equities than simply the percentage of the bond portfolio that you replaced. Do you think that, this is one of those questions that has bugged me for a while, that at different firms, compliance recognizes the reduction in risk, like goal-based risk, from allocating a percentage of your portfolio to annuities from the bond portion of your portfolio? You can take more equity risk. Ultimately, it means that you have no more risk when it comes to meeting your lifestyle goals. But do you think regulators and compliance, do they really understand this concept? Because I think a lot of advisors don't even understand this concept.
Well, I think they may not. And it's not even the case that you necessarily need to take more overall risk. You can, but if I was going to be 60-40 stocks and bonds, it's really, I can keep the 60% stocks. I'm just allocating from the bonds to the annuity. So I'm not necessarily increasing the overall risk. Now that's, as an additional benefit for additional upside growth, I could potentially be have a higher overall stock allocation, but it's not necessary to get the benefits of the annuity. As I've looked at this myself and just replicating the research of others, I wrote an article about the efficient frontier for retirement income all the way back in 2013, where the basic idea was when we're talking about retirement spending, the efficient frontier is stocks and annuities, not stocks and bonds. And that's because it reduces risk. It reduces the risk of shortfall, that I won't be able to meet my spending goals even when markets aren't doing well. And it raises the potential reward. On average, I can support a higher legacy at the end of retirement by allocating to stocks and annuities instead of stocks and bonds. And that's back to that point, because annuities, they become the workhorse for covering spending needs. And they allow the other assets to have less distribution pressure, and so greater potential long-term growth outside of the annuity. I think a lot of times when people think the annuity takes away upside potential, they're always framing it as all or nothing. It's like, all I have is an annuity. It's not, no, a part of my assets are in an annuity that supports my spending need, that reduces distribution pressure on my other assets, that allows those other assets to grow to support a greater legacy over the long term. And so that's the efficient frontier. It's stocks and annuities, not stocks and bonds.
As the baby boomer retirement wave crests, it's time to position yourself as the ideal partner for this growing pool of clients with the American College of Financial Services Retirement Income Certified Professional designation. As an RICP, you'll get the specialized knowledge to help more clients with complex retirement planning needs. With the convenience and flexibility of the latest in e-learning design, the RICP delivers applied knowledge from over 45 retirement experts on Social Security, taxation, income planning, Medicare and Medicaid, long-term care planning, and more. Get started in our 3-course program today and become an RICP in 12 months or less. Now is the time to strengthen your client relationships with deep expertise to address the unique challenges of retirement. See how you can expand your opportunities at theamericancollege.edu/RICP.
A lot of people think that when you buy an annuity, you lose upside. That's something I've actually heard from even some relatively sophisticated financial advisors. But that's not really true, is it? It's especially if you're using this type of approach where the annuity is substituting for bonds. When you run a Monte Carlo, you actually end up with higher upsides because the annuity is doing a better job of meeting that income need. So, Phil, tell me, what do you see in the field? Do you see compliance as a kind of a barrier that needs to that an advisor needs to overcome? Is there some resistance to having a riskier asset allocation once you buy the annuity?
Yeah, so I think it's getting better, Michael, right? I think it's getting better. I think compliance groups are becoming more knowledgeable on different types of annuities and how they can impact it. Compliance is there to protect the clients, and rightfully so, as Wade mentioned. We're not talking about putting all your assets into an annuity, right? We're talking about it being a part of a holistic plan. And so I do think that that compliance groups, just like they would for a mutual fund or a stock you were going to buy, they want to try and put it into a box as far as how much of a percentage of clients' liquid net worth and things of that nature you can use for an annuity. But I do think as annuities become, more mainstream, that they are becoming much more familiar with. And I think one of the nice things we're seeing too at our firms is that, go back a couple of years from now, the annuity group sat as an alternative investment. They looked at it as sort of a little sidecar to the overall investment management, wealth management platforms. And now more and more what we're seeing is annuities are included under the wealth management group. We're even seeing some CIOs, chief investment officers, including annuity allocations in sort of their forward projections and what they think is going to happen with the market. So I think all of those types of things are going to just help us in order to grow annuities, including compliance, becoming more educated on them and how they can help the overall portfolio. And really, it's not about the portfolio, it's about meeting the client needs and what their goals are.
Now, Wade, I want to ask a really quick question because I think it's important when, let's say, you're putting together a sophisticated asset allocation strategy. What does the duration of the annuity look like? So if you're thinking of replacing the bond allocation, how should you adjust the remaining bond allocation, assuming that you're incorporating the duration of the payments within the annuity structure?
Well, the annuity is going to fund a liability that ultimately, the longer you live, the more spending you'll get. And so if you want to define the duration of the annuity, it's just going to be approximately the life expectancy of the average customer of it. And that if I'm 65, maybe my life expectancy is in my mid to late 80s. So the duration, I honestly might not be explaining that right. I'd have to think a little bit about like how to properly define the duration of the annuity. That might be too lengthy. But certainly, if we're thinking about with bonds, the annuity is much more like a longer term maturity bond than a shorter term maturity bond. So it probably would make sense at least to be thinking more of allocating from the longer duration type bond holdings that one has and maintain any remaining fixed income. It's not so much to fund that retirement spending goal. It's more of having a reserve of liquid assets. So probably keeping the remaining bonds more on the shorter end of the duration side.
So that's a good point, that if you do buy the annuity, then maybe you can ramp down the duration of the remainder of your bond portfolio and think of it more as funding emergency expenses or, I guess blocky sort of consumption needs where you might have to fund, let's say, property taxes or something that you want that shorter duration. You can have it because the annuity represents a substitute for the longer duration portion of your bond portfolio. You've also made the point with Michael Kitces that the value of the annuity actually falls over time throughout retirement because the present value is decreasing.
Right. The value of your remaining payments decreases as you age just because your remaining time horizon gets shorter. But you're receiving those payments along the way. And so naturally, you're spending from something whose value will decline as you age.
And if you're thinking from a liability-driven investing approach, then what you'll see is that the duration of the liability as you get older. I mean, it's kind of morbid, but the duration of the liability as you get older is shrinking because your expected lifespan is shorter.
Right. And sometimes people coming more from the investment side of the world say, oh, you don't need the annuity. You can just manage the duration of your bond portfolio to match the duration of your liability. But no, the duration of your liability is dynamic. Well, yes, you could manage a bond portfolio to replicate the duration of the liability you're trying to fund. It's just a lot more complicated than I think
and
people
you'll spend
generally.
less because you're retaining the longevity risk by trying to fund that spending goal using your own portfolio. And when you delegate that to an insurance company, essentially they're creating an LDI portfolio with mortality credits so you can spend more every month. Okay, so let's end with a discussion about, let's say, variable annuities that have some kind of protection rider. So there are a lot of different structures where you can invest in a stock and bond portfolio within a variable annuity, but you can also have a rider that, say, limits the downside of the growth in the annuity. How should you then think about what the asset allocation really looks like within the variable annuity? Phil, do you have an opinion on this one?
I have an opinion. I mean, I love that type of product that you're mentioning, Michael. No shock there, right? There's something that's called a guaranteed minimum accumulation benefit, or a GMAB, and it's really an old school rider that they had on the VAs many years ago, and they've fallen out of favor. New York Life has been one of the few companies that have kind of stayed in that marketplace. But what's interesting is over the last 6 to 12 months, we're seeing more and more of the competition out there. More and more folks are launching it. And it's really because of the rise of some of these type of annuity products that give you equity-like returns, but they give you some type of a backstop, some type of a guarantee to limit downside loss. I think one of the things that really is exciting about a GMAB, and it's for those clients that sort of need to be in the market, they need to outpace inflation, but they don't have the risk tolerance to kind of stomach the ups and downs of the market. And what it really does is it just gives you the confidence to stay invested. And what we're seeing is some of the research that we've done on this is that, believe it or not, the overall portfolio, again, it's a piece of the portfolio, but we see that clients that invest in a VA with a GMAB actually invest up to 15% more in equities than you would if you're just running a regular portfolio. And it's because of that confidence on it, which is very, very interesting.
And is that within the VA or is that outside of the VA?
I think that's inside of the VA. They take a little bit more risk inside of the VA because they know they have the backstop on it. And what's interesting about the newer products, right? For example, is it used to be you just get your money back after a certain period of time. Now they're giving you a premium, so you actually get back maybe 10% more if the market goes to heck in a handbasket, if you will. You actually get 10% more on your premium back. So they're really feeling confident. The phone calls to advisors go down because they know that they are set up for success no matter what the market does.
Well, that makes perfect sense because you're essentially cutting off the left-hand tail of the distribution. And, in that sense, you could probably take more risk within a VA that incorporates a downside rider. Wade, I know you've done a lot of research where you've simulated the performance of different types of product structures that do incorporate downside protection. What's your philosophy on how you consider that type of product as part of an overall asset allocation?
Well, right, absolutely. The living benefit on a variable annuity, it's like a put option on the stock market in the sense that even if the market goes down, your spending is going to be protected at a certain level. If markets do well, you get the upside potential, the step-up opportunities. Your spending could increase, but if markets go down, your spending is protected. And therefore, that incentivizes the owner to invest as aggressively as allowed just because they get the upside potential from that, but the insurance company is on the hook for any downside risks associated with that. That's why sometimes insurance companies have to put caps on how aggressively you can invest, just because it's more expensive to provide that protection, the higher the riskiness of the portfolio is. And so absolutely being able to think about, and as Phil noted, we see people actually do this. They do invest more aggressively when they have that protection in place because they know they have the downside protection. They have that put option on the stock market.
So it's an interesting way to think about a financial asset as part of an overall portfolio. It's like you're buying a portfolio of assets that may have, say, a 70% equity allocation within the VA, but ultimately it's nowhere near as risky as a 70% allocation outside the VA because you don't have that, long-term put option. Those types of put options can be really expensive to actually try to replicate yourself. So there it is an interesting way to protect against the downside risk, to make people feel more comfortable with accepting the risk that can provide that potential upside. So, we've both done simulations on different types of product strategies that incorporate downside protection. And the best way to think about them is that they're not equal to the asset allocation within the product. So they're less risky. So if you think about, if you have a product as part of an overall asset allocation, even if it's 70% equities within the product, it may only be equivalent to something that's, say, maybe 50% equities or 60% equities in terms of the downside risk. So you have to consider not just the asset allocation within the product, but also how the rider affects the downside when you're thinking about potential risk.
Right, and how it impacts your ability to meet your spending goals over your lifetime, because you need that liability component as part of the conversation, or otherwise just looks like someone that, well, you're investing in the variable annuity, it has a higher fee drag, so it must not be as good. No, that's not the right way to think about it. It's that asset base that you put in the variable annuity will support spending even if you outlive the value of the underlying assets. And an unprotected investment portfolio can't do that. And so that's the value of the insurance. That's the value of the living benefit. That's really when you have one of these as part of your mix, a variable annuity with a living benefit, in addition to other assets, you really treat the variable annuity piece as the spending workhorse. You get as much spending out of that as possible. And I was talking about this point before, but it applies here as well. That reduces the distribution pressure on the other assets outside of the annuity. And that lays that foundation for better long-term performance in terms of meeting spending and supporting just having the value of those assets grow for legacy and liquidity and other needs.
Yeah, I think both of us have this sort of pet peeve about rider fees that are characterized as, say, like asset management fees, when the reality is that you're paying for the cost of these put options, and it's more like you're paying an insurance premium. And there is an expectation that in a certain number of circumstances where people live a long time and the market does very poorly, the insurance company is going to have to pay claims on that premium. So it's best not to characterize it as an expense, more as an insurance premium, with some expectation that when you need it the most, the insurance company is going to pay out those claims. All right, this has been a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much, Phil. Thank you so much, Wade. And thank you, everyone, for joining us for this episode of the Annuity Insights podcast.
Thanks for listening, and we hope you join us on future episodes. Annuity Insights is a production of the American College of Financial Services. Annuity Insights is produced and owned by the American College of Financial Services with generous support from New York Life Insurance Company. Accuracy of information is subject to change, taxes, legal, rates, etc., but believed accurate as of the time of recording, January through April 2025.